Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is Darkfireslide, and welcome to a guide video. Today I'm going to be talking about how to play as small nations. In my Revolution tutorial video, a lot of people ask me, like, how did you get Bosnia to be big enough to encompass the entirety of the Balkans? Well, today I'm going to try to answer that question in a kind of a general guide on how to play small nations, because the strategy that is required to play a small nation, especially outside of the Holy Roman Empire, is kind of different than what you do as a large nation, since as a large nation you can just kind of do whatever you want, whenever you want, for the most part, and it's more about politics between big nations rather than, you know, local level silliness. So, anyway, I'm going to talk about 5 things that I think will be extremely helpful in helping you to play as smaller nations. 5 tips, tricks, whatever you want to call them. And so, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so first let's take a look at Bosnia. So the first major thing, and this is the most important part of the entire video, you could just watch this section and then be done, and you will probably be fine. But the most important thing for playing as small nations is getting alliances. You need to know how to play the diplomacy game. And to that end, let's talk about the things that make alliances. So first and foremost, the most obvious thing that's going to help you get alliances is religion. You know, if we look at the religious map mode, we could see, you know, all these different nations are different faiths. For example, we've got so let's talk about, like, Bosnia and Serbia. So Serbia is Orthodox, which means that they're going to be more likely to get alliances with Orthodox nations, but Bosnia is Catholic. So this means that, with the rest of the Catholic world, Bosnia is another Catholic nation. So this is going to give them a huge diplomatic advantage, opinion advantage, which is going to give them even more reasons for alliances. It's also going to allow them to get royal marriages easier, which also helps to get alliances. So Bosnia is actually in a really good position, they're at 30 development, which isn't that great, but what is great about it is that they can still build up to about, I think, what was it, like 10,000 troops? So they can get 10,000 troops, which is more than a lot of one-province miners can, and they're Catholic. So that means they can marry to a big nation like Castile, France, preferably Austria if possible. Things, you know, people like that, and they can get that alliance pretty easily as a result of that. Now, if you don't, let's talk about Serbia instead. So Serbia is not Catholic. So how would they go about getting an alliance? Well, first of all, Serbia has about 14 more development than Bosnia. This only means they're going to have about 1 more force limit. However, Serbia has a gold mine, and so one thing that Serbia can do, if it wants to get an alliance with a country that might not otherwise do it, what they can do is build over their force limit, and this will increase the relative reasons for accepting an alliance between nations. Because if your army's bigger, they have less of a reason to decline your alliance call. So, that being said, let's see, talking about relative strength. Yes, of course. Okay. So it's important to look at, like, every nation when you're thinking about, like, in the early game, like, okay, well, what religion is my country, and how is that going to help me, and how big of an army can I raise? How is that going to help me? And one other thing you should consider is, if you're in a really tough spot and you need to get an early game alliance, a classic example of this is Byzantium, for example. So Byzantium is in a really bad spot because they're Orthodox, their army isn't that big. In fact, they have less development than Serbia starting out, and nobody was going to want to ally them at the start of the game. Even Serbia is reluctant for an alliance. So what you have to do is, in addition to building up an army, potentially over your force limit, what you will also consider doing is hiring the Statesman Advisor. The Statesman gives you +2 diplomatic reputation, which is enough to give about 6 reasons or so, if I'm correct on that. I may be off on the numbers. At any rate, this will help you get over sometimes the amount of reasons that you need after you've improved relations, and potentially that may be enough to get a royal marriage, which will help you get an alliance, or it may help you get just the alliance, period. The reason I keep mousing over Poland, by the way, is because, especially in this start, and you're going to want to look for this basically wherever you start, there's usually one big nation that is really easy to get an alliance with for some reason. In this part of Europe, it's actually really easy to get an alliance with France, even though it probably shouldn't be. And in the Balkans, Poland is usually really, really willing to get an alliance with you, even if you're Orthodox. So That's just something to consider. Think of like the regional powers in your area that are going to want to ally you, and say you're playing as Bosnia, and Austria, and for whatever reason, Austria and France won't ally you. Well, okay, that's fine. There's an entire Catholic Holy Roman Empire here. Sometimes you don't need a big ally. Sometimes you just need a bunch of smaller allies, because the main goal of getting alliances is deterrence. You need to get enough allies that nobody is going to want to attack you unless they're absolutely certain that they're going to defeat you. So, if you can't ally Austria, and you can't ally Poland, and you can't ally France for whatever reason as Bosnia, Bohemia is another great ally because they're a regional power. Bavaria is fairly strong. Saxony has a decent number of troops. Savoy is there. The Papal State will probably ally you. Milan will probably ally you. Denmark might even ally you. In the early game, England. I wouldn't trust England as an ally, though. They don't like leaving the English Isles. At any rate, you get the point that I'm making about this. Another example of this, of a good regional power, for example, is over here in India we've got Jaunpur. And Jaunpur is Sunni, this is true, but for some reason, like they are like the Poland of India, because they will accept alliances with pretty much almost anyone if you improve relations enough and they don't want your land. So always be aware of, the kinds of people that you can form alliances with, and sometimes all you need. So, for example, for Bosnia, let's this is one thing I want to mention before I move on to the next part. So the Ottomans, for example, say you want to defeat the Ottomans because you want to get into their land, you want to crusade, or you just feel really threatened by them and you want to get rid of them as soon as possible. Whatever. So, one thing you should really look for when you are looking for alliances is look for people who are going to rival the main threat to your country. So in this case, say Poland has rivaled the Ottomans, and if you're playing as Serbia or Bosnia, then allying Poland is going to be really important, because if you want to defeat the Ottomans, you need to make sure that your big ally is going to help you out. So anyway, that's enough of that. Let's talk about after you get those alliances. So we're playing as Bosnia. We've gotten Serbia, Wallachia, Bohemia, and Poland as allies. So that's 4 allies. Most of them hate Hungary, or at least don't like Hungary more than they like you, because you have improved relations and are now their ally. So the first big target, the biggest threat to you as Bosnia, is going to be Hungary. Now, Hungary usually allies Austria. This is true. So one big thing that you should look for is, if you have to expand into a bigger nation, you need to really time your first war perfectly, because getting that first war done is going to matter a lot. It's the most important war of the game, because it's when you need to branch out, expand, get some development, and have enough to actually start building up your armies and building up your country. So what you'll look for is the timing. And what you need to do is make sure that if any of your allies, like say Wallachia, you're Wallachia only ally, and the Ottomans attack them, well, you're just going to have to dishonor the call, because if you answer that call to arms, you are going to die, you're going to lose your army, it's going to be a waste of time, and it's just not going to be worth it. And so what you'll want to wait for is when Hungary and Austria, since Austria will usually be Hungary's biggest ally, this is just an example, is when Austria is locked in a war with, like, France, and he's taken a lot of casualties, he's in a lot of debt, and he is at the point where he is going to dishonor the call with Hungary. That is when you attack. That is when you strike, is when almost none of their allies or the allies remaining are insignificant. That is when you should attack another nation. And once you do that, you should be able to win your first war, especially if you've got a big ally like Poland, for example. And that'll allow you to expand in your first war and just get the ball rolling, basically. Now, in the meantime, if you don't really have, if that war is taking a long time to happen, what you can instead look for is trying to expand into other smaller nations around you. For example, say the Ottomans get into a big war. The Ottomans guarantee the independence of Ragusa at the start of the game, but if the Ottomans get into a really big war for whatever reason, say with Austria-Hungary, or the Mamluks, or with a strong QQ, you may be able to attack Ragusa, since the Ottomans may not accept the call to arms. Alternatively, if you've got a tech advantage or a general advantage over Serbia, and you haven't allied them, you can also expand into Serbia and take their land, which is especially helpful because Serbia has a gold mine. In the meantime, you should also be looking for one province miners to make your vassals, because a vassal can give you an additional 5,000 to 6,000 troops, and this is extremely important when you're small and your development isn't high enough to build your own army. So those are just all things to consider when you're playing as a smaller nation. Now, tip number 3, since the first war was the second tip, the third tip is that your army matters. Yes, I know this is a crazy idea. The 10,000 troops that you provide as Bosnia are extremely important in a lot of ways. For example, they are extremely important in defeating the Hungarian army, which is only going to be about 30,000 or so at the start of the game. So, like I said, if you can't ally Poland or Austria or France for whatever reason to attack Hungary, then what you can do is just ally a bunch of these smaller nations. And I know I've already said this, but with your 10,000 troops, Wallachia 10,000 troops, and Bohemia is like 20,000 troops, that's 40,000, and suddenly you have an army that's bigger than Hungary's because you've attacked at a time when Hungary's allies didn't accept a call to arms. And that means that your 10,000 troops are suddenly extremely important in defeating the enemy. Now, it's also very important to make sure that you keep your manpower up, because as a smaller nation, manpower comes back very slowly, it is very hard to build new troops, and you're going to need that manpower to kill rebels. So you need to avoid battles at all costs, basically. But when there are battles, you need to participate because they are pivotal in winning wars in the early part of your small empire. And yes, if you run out of manpower, it can be extremely disastrous for your country. So if you, for example, took land from Hungary, as Serbia, this is especially a problem because Hungary is Catholic. So when you take this land, it's going to be wrong culture because it's Hungarian. It's going to be wrong religion because it's Catholic. So that means you're going to take tons of unrest. You're going to take tons of, you're going to get tons of rebels as well. And the provinces themselves aren't going to be that effective until you convert them. So you're going to expect rebels, and so it's very important to make sure that your manpower is intact at the end of a war, because you don't have the money to build mercs as a small country. Alright, tip number 4, I'm getting kind of into the more eclectic things. So I'm going to give Brittany as an example, because this is the best example of when I've used this mechanic. So sometimes declaring a no casus belli war is the best way to declare a war. It's the best kind of war for a smaller nation. And the best example I can think of is this time I played as Brittany. And what happened was, I managed to get in alliance with Castile, and obviously I want to expand into France, because France is my culture and my religion, or my culture group anyway. So, the problem is, Castile was friendly towards France, but didn't ally France. And this is a problem, because that means Castile doesn't want to attack France. And when France is engaged against Austria and England, that is a perfect time to attack. But Castile wouldn't attack them. However, even though I couldn't attack France, France at the time was allied to Navarra. And so the light blinked on, and Castile wasn't allied to Navarra, but France was. So, as Brittany, rather than attacking France directly, I declared a no casus belli war against Navarra. This gives me, of course, -2 stability and 20 aggressive expansion with everyone around me, but what it allows me to do is attack the French and take their land, and because it's in the French culture group, that means that everyone is going to care a lot less about the land that I take from France, just because they're in the French culture group, and so only France is going to care, but you're allied to Castile and Burgundy, so who cares, right? Anyway, so that's the kind of situation you should look for. Sometimes a no casus belli war against a very weak ally can mean the difference in winning a war against a bigger nation. Rather than fighting all of that big nation's allies, you attack the smaller ally, and then you basically are actually fighting the big country. It's a proxy war, basically. And finally, the last tip that I can give for playing smaller nations that I can, that I've written down, is your national ideas. Look at the way that your national ideas, and especially your traditions, what you start with, how those things help you and impact you. So, for example here, Bosnian traditions are tolerance of heretics +4 and religious unity. These are extremely helpful for a small nation, because fighting rebels as a smaller nation is extremely difficult. So this means that any Orthodox and, later on Protestant Reformed provinces that you take are basically going to have positive tolerance. And positive tolerance means that they're not going to have unrest, rather they're going to lose unrest, which is really, really good. And as well, the religious unity is going to lower your national unrest, just because it's going to help your, country have all those different religions. And this obviously would stack very well with humanist ideas later on down the road. Now let's take a look at a country like Serbia, for example. Serbia gets manpower recovery speed plus 15% and reinforced speed plus 15%. The important part of this is the manpower recovery speed because, as we've discussed, it is very difficult to get manpower back as a smaller nation, and so this is really going to help you with fighting wars and with taking those early provinces and killing rebels off. Let's look at Wallachia. Wallachia gets discipline plus 5% and hostile core creation on us. So, discipline plus 5% means that your troops are going to basically, on average, do 5% more damage and take 5% less damage. So this helps with your manpower, and it makes your contribution to the war all that more effective, even as a small nation. And the second part, hostile core creation, means that countries are going to be very less inclined to attack you. Even the AI is going to be less inclined to attack you if you have this hostile core creation modifier. Georgia gets something similar in the start of the game. Now, all that being said, the traditions are going to be the most important part just because those are what you start with, and those are going to be what matters while you're still small, because by the time you start getting your actual ideas out, you're probably going to have bulged out a little bit, gotten up to about 100 development or so, and so you're in a much less precarious position because you've expanded enough where you can actually get alliances fairly more reliably. But anyway, those are the 5 tips. Let's do a recap. So first of all, most important thing, getting alliances with big countries that are going to help you expand in a direction that actually matters. The second thing, time your first war in such a way that you are only fighting against the major enemy, in our example, Hungary, by themselves, so that you can take as much land as possible and stand to have a 100% chance to win the war. Number 3, remember that your army matters. You need to keep it alive, both to contribute to major battles and to help kill rebels. Number 4, sometimes a no casus belli war can mean the difference between surviving and dying. And number 5 is to look at your national ideas, specifically your traditions. And lastly, I just want to say this. It is perfectly okay to restart. It is common to die as a country such as Albania, Byzantium, and so on, because they are in very difficult positions. This is just the nature of the beast when you're playing as smaller countries. It's going to happen, and you know what? It's okay to restart. Don't get frustrated. If you do get frustrated because of bad RNG, take a break and come back a day later or something, and I'm sure you can come through it. A little bit of perseverance goes a long way. And if you don't play on Iron Man, it's okay to save scum as well if you're about to declare a big war and you're not sure if you're going to win. If it's about 50-50, I think it's okay to save scum right before the war and just, play it that way. Of course, now everybody's going to think that I'm a save scummer on my campaigns, but hey, worth the risk, I guess. At any rate, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope I really demonstrated, hey, these are tips and strategies for playing smaller nations. I hope that it's going to improve your gameplay and that you're going to be able to have fun as those nations that you before thought were impossible, maybe. So, at any rate, thank you for joining me, my fellow conquerors. Godspeed, and I'll see you on the next one.